Hi guys, how's it going? I'm IAmPattyJack, and what you're seeing right now is a game called Days of War. I covered this a few months ago back when it first hit early access, and overall my impressions were pretty mediocre, but not necessarily bad. It was doing alright for an early access game. It had enough going on where you could be entertained for a few hours. However, I stumbled across the Steam page kind of randomly last night when I was just looking through things, because I like to do that every now and then, and I noticed something a little bit weird going on with the development of the game and a few other things. So the last time I looked at Days of War, the reviews for it were mixed to mostly positive, if my memory serves correct. That has taken a drastic downturn into mostly negative, and the recent overall reviews being very negative. In fact, it's even gotten worse since last night, where the overall score just said mixed, but now it's dropped down to mostly negative. So what the hell happened to make Days of War go on this downward spiral of community backlash and very annoyed players? Well, it ended up piquing my interest, so I started taking a look, and it ends up being, from what I can see, two major contributing factors right now. It seems to come down to a combination of recent updates and a very, very low and dwindling player base. Despite being released at the start of this year in early access, the game has failed to hold a player base. In fact, it's gotten so bad that there's fewer than 10 people playing on a typical 24-hour peak period. I myself have tried playing the game multiple times, and only once did I even find a server that had anyone in it. And it turned out to be a German person who was coincidentally playing on the German side, and we initiated an Allies and Axis ceasefire, which I found hilarious. So in short, there's no one playing this damn game. And being that this is a multiplayer-only experience with zero options in single player or even putting bots in maps in the current state, it makes the game nearly unplayable. So it's working out right now that if you buy Days of War, you're most likely not going to be able to play it unless you can find a big group of people who all want to play the game with you. And for a game that isn't even out of early access yet and has only been out since January is kind of a big deal. But having a low player count doesn't seem to be the only reason that people are currently very disparaged about the development process of the game. There's been a big uproar from the remaining community lately over the decision to remove things like ADS from the game and increase recoil. So now it only works out that around 3 or so classes in the game can even aim down their sight, while the rest of everyone is stuck firing all their weapons and hoping to God it's gonna hit something. Now it's worth noting, of course, that Days of War is in many essences a spiritual successor to the old game Day of Defeat, which the original version of it didn't feature ADS as well. However, the consensus from the overall player base that's still there is that the removal of ADS seems to have been a very poor choice by the developer. Well, they posted about it in the update after the removal was implemented, where they basically explained that they wanted to give their game a more unique identity, and honestly, I've read through this a few times, and none of it really makes a whole lot of sense to me. They said that they never got the ADS to a place that they were happy with it, and they think that having ADS created confusion about what the game was. There are many games, both realistic and arcade, that rely heavily on the ADS mechanic, the most notable being the upcoming Call of Duty World War II. They went on to say that offering something unique will better position them if they add things like increased recoil instead of ADS. Now look, I'm not going to argue about whether or not this is the right thing for the developer to do. It's their game, they have total creative control over it. They can do whatever they want. It might not be beneficial for consumers, but at the end of the day, you vote with your wallet, and especially when you Kickstarter a game, you're always under a certain degree of risk. But that certain degree of risk definitely applies to the developer as well, and the overall consensus about these recent updates are that, well, people don't really like them, and if I want to give my personal opinion, which I'm totally entitled to do, I think it's kind of dumb to take out ADS out of your game because you want it to be less like Call of Duty and you think people might confuse the two, because that's not the case at all. Taking down the ability to aim down sights doesn't necessarily give your game a unique feel, and honestly it baffles me why they think it does. Similarly, adding increased recoil can give it a somewhat authentic or even realistic feeling, but that's downplayed by the removal of ADS because, you know, in real fights and in real war, people aim down their guns because that's how you hit things. In fact, I think it kind of does the opposite of what the developer is trying to do. It doesn't make the game feel more unique, it makes it feel like it has less features than other products on the market, which probably isn't the type of unique they're going for. So at the end of that post, the developer also said that there's going to be a busy couple months coming up with some major updates and big edits to how the game plays and everything that its identity is, and they're going to try to make it more in line with what they want the game to be. And that's the thing with early access, you're buying into a game that isn't totally done yet, things can be taken out or put into the game, you might not like some of them, or things can be switched around, big balance updates happen, that's all kind of par for the course. The problem with this game right now is that the developer isn't necessarily telling you everything that you need to know, and they're not being totally transparent with it. They've taken out ADS, but they've given no indication as to the big direction that the game wants to go. They talk about trying to make their game more unique, but we have no idea what their version of unique is, so we can only do the guessing game. And that understandably makes people who kickstarted the game or bought into the early access a little bit irate. And that's in addition to all the other stuff that you'd expect from an early access game, things like people reporting not being able to launch the game on their system, experiencing frequent crashes, and not being able to run the game properly on their system. So when you combine all this stuff together, you have a recipe for disaster, and that seems to be what's happening with Days of War. And it definitely doesn't help that other games like Day of Infamy have come out and kind of blown it out of the water with the amount of content that they offer. So there's one more thing that I want to talk about, and that's about some misleading quotes that are on the Steam page for Days of War. This was what I originally noticed that made me really want to look into it. I took a look at some of the box quotes for the game, and they seem to be not quite on the up and up and very misleading towards potential buyers. In fact, two of them specifically are from people who at that point I don't believe had even played the game, because the articles that the box quotes link to are simply articles announcing that the game's on Kickstarter. One of them being an article that Joe Parlock wrote for Destructoid, in which they literally took part of the title of his article out of context and put it as a box quote to make it seem like he thought that Days of War was a worthy spiritual successor to Day of Defeat. And the second one being from a Forbes article written by Jason Evangello, I apologize if I butchered your name, which was a very similar scenario, simply talking about the game being on Kickstarter. Now, taking box quotes and developers or publishers or whoever, using them out of context isn't a new thing at all. It's been around since movies were a thing, and we're very used to seeing them. However, it doesn't make it ethically or morally right. In this case, I do believe that's misleading to consumers, especially when the quote comes from an article a full year before the game was even released in early access. So while critics are used to this happening, I have taken the initiative and sent out some emails to contact the writers of these articles to let them know that this is going on. So that's the current update with Days of War. People are very unhappy with the current player base, or lack thereof, along with some very questionable changes and recent updates as well. Throw in the fact that they're using some misleading quotes on the Steam page and aren't really communicating with their player base, and it seems like something very odd is going on. So I would highly recommend that the developers get back to me, because I have actually reached out to them as well for some quotes to do a short interview and get their side of the story, because of course there is two sides to every coin. In the meantime, if you have any other thoughts or comments you want to leave below, or anything else you found, by all means, tell me in the comments below. I would love to hear about them. And if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I do lots of different content like this. I am PattyJack. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.